Nurse Christina Riggs, convicted of smothering her 2 young children to death in 1997.
I only reached out and told somebody what I was feeling or thinking.
Set to die for killing her children, Christina Marie Riggs woke up knowing it was her last day alive. She had once been a nurse and also a mother. Now she was a convicted killer who had been sentenced to death with no more court dates or appeals. Just the steady ticking of the clock counted down to the moment she would finally face the consequences of her crime. Stay tuned as we take a detailed look at the events that unfolded during her last 24 hours. It was 6 o'clock in the morning on May 2nd, 2000. For most people, it was a normal day, but for Christina Marie Riggs, it was not. It was the last time she would ever wake up to a new day, the last sunrise she would ever see. The tension in the air was thick inside the Cummins unit in Arkansas, where she had been moved days earlier on the 30th of April 2000 to await execution. She had spent the last 3 years on death row at the McPherson unit after being convicted of killing her 2 children in 1997. She was now just hours away from becoming the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845. There were no visits planned. She had not requested clemency. She had asked the courts not to intervene. Christina Riggs had rejected all appeals and legal delays. She told her attorneys she did not want to live, and she made it clear she saw death as a way to reunite with her children. By morning, no more legal motions were pending. The state had cleared the way for the execution to proceed. No final appeals were filed that day. Christina Riggs was scheduled to die by lethal injection later that evening. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Christina Marie Riggs had been under observation for 2 hours. Inside the Cummins unit's execution facility, her final day was unfolding without protest, delay, or interference yet. No legal motions were pending in any state or federal court. Riggs had waived all rights to post-conviction appeals. Months earlier, she had submitted written statements to the court declaring that she did not want to pursue clemency and did not wish to fight her sentence. The Arkansas Supreme Court accepted her decision, allowing the execution to move forward without challenge. Corrections staff followed strict procedures throughout the morning, though the Department of Corrections has not released a minute-by-minute account of her movements at this hour. Official reports state that Riggs was fully compliant. She remained housed in the execution unit under 24-hour watch, with guards checking in at regular intervals. No phone calls were reported, and no visitors arrived. Her legal counsel remained available, but still she did not make any attempt to contact. In the months before this day, Riggs had been evaluated by mental health professionals to determine whether she was competent to be executed. The court found her to be mentally sound and capable of making legal decisions. Her request to proceed with the sentence was honored by the state. By this hour, prison officials had confirmed that all steps were in place. The lethal injection procedure had been reviewed. The substances were ready. The execution team was on standby. Arkansas had not executed a woman in over 150 years, but they would before the night was over, and Christina Marie Riggs had not changed her mind. At 9 o'clock in the morning on May 2nd, 2000, Christina Marie Riggs was still in her cell at the Cummins unit. The hours were moving slowly. Her execution was now just 12 hours away. As she sat behind concrete walls and steel doors, the world outside had not forgotten what brought her here, but few knew the full story of the woman who now waited to die. Before the crime that shocked the state of Arkansas, Christina Marie Riggs lived a life filled with pain that few ever saw. She was born on September 2nd, 1971 in Lawton, Oklahoma, and grew up in Oklahoma City, where her childhood was marked by abuse and trauma. According to court records and interviews, Christina endured repeated sexual abuse by her stepbrother and a neighbor during her early years. The abuse left lasting emotional scars. By the time she was a teenager, she was already struggling with severe depression, and by 14 had turned to alcohol and marijuana to cope. Despite the chaos, she tried to find her purpose. After high school, she became a licensed practical nurse, eventually working at home health agencies and later at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Little Rock. Later, she worked at Baptist Hospital in Sherwood, Arkansas, caring for others even as her emotional health continued to decline. In July of 1993, she married John Riggs, but their wedding ended in tragedy. Christina suffered a miscarriage, an event she later described as deeply traumatic. The couple stayed together for several years and had 2 children, Justin, born in June 1992, and Shelby, born in December 1994. After some years, the marriage began to fall apart. According to official testimony, the final break came when John struck Justin in the stomach, hard enough that the child needed medical treatment. Christina filed for divorce soon after, now a single mother, working long shifts as a nurse and also battling depression. The pain Christina carried, abuse, loss, and isolation, did not excuse what she would eventually do, but it gave the world a glimpse into her life and what they thought was the reason she did what she did. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Inside the Cummins unit, Christina Marie Riggs remained under close supervision. Her choice to waive all appeals was rare, especially for a woman convicted of capital murder. But Christina Riggs had made that decision early and never once turned away from it. As she sat in her cell staring at the walls, she probably thought of how her life might have turned out if she hadn't gone down the wrong path. While she was a nurse, she worked at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Little Rock, caring for patients, including veterans with chronic illnesses and mental health struggles. She later worked at the Arkansas Heart Hospital. She had medical training and had access to substances. Initially, Riggs's mother and lawyer said she suffered post-traumatic stress after working as a nurse in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing. The matter never came up at her trial. Riggs worked at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Oklahoma City from 1990 to July 1995. Still, the hospital denied and said that she was not sent to the scene of the April 1995 bombing. On the 4th of November 1997, Riggs made a decision that would shock the entire world and start a case that would be remembered decades later. She killed her children Justin, 5, and Shelby, 2. Riggs gave each of them an antidepressant amitriptyline brand name, Elavil, to make them drowsy, then injected Justin with potassium chloride. She did not know, however, that it must be diluted and fed intravenously into the body, or it burns the skin and veins without reaching the heart. When Justin began crying, she injected him with some morphine and then smothered the boy and his little sister. Riggs then took 28 antidepressant tablets and injected herself with potassium chloride. But instead of the substance killing her, it injured her arm tissue, and she was later discovered unconscious by her mother. By mid-morning on the day of her execution, Riggs had not spoken publicly about the crime in years, but the details remained on record, clear, chilling, and unforgettable. She never denied what she had done, and in 11 hours, she was to face the judgment of the dark and gruesome choice she made. Outside the prison walls, public attention was growing. News outlets had begun releasing background reports, recapping the crime that brought Riggs to death row. It was a rare case, a woman convicted of murdering her children and openly asking to be executed. By early afternoon, the media presence near Cummins had increased, but inside the prison, everything was still quiet. Riggs was eerily quiet. In the days following the murders in 1997, Riggs was arrested while recovering from her suicide attempt. A suicide note had been left at the scene, along with empty syringes and pill bottles. According to police and court testimony, She wrote that she could not go on living and that her decision was meant to spare her children from what she believed would be a life of pain. She was charged with capital murder. At trial, her defense attorneys presented evidence that she had a long history of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. They argued that her actions were driven by mental illness, not cruelty. Riggs told the court she had been sexually abused as a child and had struggled with suicidal thoughts for years. The prosecutors argued the fact and told jurors that Riggs's children had become an inconvenience to her. They said she left the children by themselves while she competed in karaoke contests and had plotted their deaths for weeks. Prosecutors went further by saying that even if Riggs wanted to die, she had no right to take her children with her. At the time of her conviction, Riggs begged jurors to give her the death penalty. She grudgingly pursued one appeal at the insistence of her family and lawyer, but when it was rejected by the Arkansas Supreme Court, she decided it was God's will that she be executed. With the hope that his client would have an 11th-hour change of heart, John Wesley Hall, Jr., her attorney, had filed a sealed petition on April 14th to appeal. U.S. District Judge George Howard, Jr. said Governor Mike Huckabee's office released a statement noting that he has never received a request for clemency in this case. Huckabee had the authority to issue a 30-day reprieve, and 2 groups had asked him to intervene. The Attorney General's office had indicated that if Riggs had changed her mind at any time, the governor's office would have granted her a reprieve. Just 2 other Arkansas death row inmates have chosen to drop appeals and not ask the governor for clemency. Both have been executed. Her execution is the 22nd in Arkansas since it resumed the death penalty 1990. Riggs is the 5th female executed nationwide since the U.S. The Supreme Court lifted a ban on capital punishment in 1976. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of her execution, Riggs had spent nearly 3 years on death row. She had never asked for a retrial, never requested forgiveness, and now she was just hours from getting exactly what she had asked for: death. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Christina Marie Riggs was served her final meal. This was one of the few personal choices she had made during her last day. She did not speak publicly or meet with family, but she did choose what to eat before dying. According to prison records, her last meal included steak, fried chicken, rolls, mashed potatoes, 2 cans of Coca-Cola, and strawberry shortcake. It was a traditional Southern meal, simple and familiar. She ate it alone in the holding cell at the Cummins unit. Prison officials did not report how much of it she finished, but no complaints were made, and no special requests were added. She just ate her meal silently, savoring every bite of it because that was the last time she would ever eat anything. Her execution was still 5 hours away, and yet all preparations had already been confirmed. The Arkansas Department of Corrections had checked the chemical supplies. The staff trained for lethal injection had been briefed. The execution chamber was ready. With no appeals or delays pending, the procedure was expected to take place on schedule. They were all waiting silently and patiently for what would take place over the next few hours. At 7 o'clock in the evening on the 2nd of May 2000, tension coiled tightly around both Christina Marie Riggs and the world outside the Cummins unit in Arkansas. Inside the execution facility, final preparations were reaching their peak. Outside, protesters and activists had converged in a show of solidarity and sorrow. By this hour, the execution team had completed the final review of the lethal injection protocol. All necessary chemicals, including sodium thiopental, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride, were prepared and secured by standard operating procedures. Riggs was informed that the process would begin within the hour. She remained calm and cooperative. Officials later noted she exhibited no hesitation or resistance. Meanwhile, outside in Little Rock, approximately 50 people gathered at 7:45 p.m. at Trinity Episcopal Church for a candlelight vigil. They lit candles, sang gospel hymns, and held signs like, "Don't kill for me," and "Execute justice, not people." After the vigil, the group marched in silence to the governor's mansion, delivering a powerful message of protest and grief. The vigil drew attention to the mental health component of Riggs's crime, rather than condoning it. For the protesters, the evening symbolized more than one case. It was a moment for the broader fight against capital punishment, especially when mental health is a factor. They argued that Riggs was not in the right state of mind when she committed the crimes, and also pleaded for execution. But the sentence was passed, and the execution was still scheduled to be held. The ACLU of Arkansas and the Arkansas Coalition to abolish the death penalty had jointly submitted a formal plea to Governor Huckabee, citing due process concerns and Riggs's mental illness. Though Riggs had waived appeals, these organizations sought a reprieve, or at least a stay of execution. Governor Mike Huckabee, who had the authority to issue a 30-day stay, received the petitions, but by 7 p.m., it was clear no clemency would come and the execution would proceed as scheduled. By 8 o'clock in the evening on the 2nd of May, 2000. The final countdown was in its most intense phase. Christina Marie Riggs was just some mere steps from the cold, lethal injection chamber. Staff had completed every required procedure by this hour. Guards had reviewed Christina's identity and court orders, confirming no last-minute stays or legal intervention. The 3-part lethal dose of sodium thiopental, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride was confirmed, labeled, and in place. Everything was set and ready for the execution. It seems that Riggs has finally accepted her fate, but there was someone who had not come to peace with the verdict. John Wesley Hall, Jr., her attorney, was on standby, ready to call within seconds if his client, Christina Marie Riggs, decided at the last minute to fight her 9 o'clock execution. Hall would never need those numbers because Riggs never contacted him. Some commentators would later describe her choice as a state-assisted suicide, explaining that Riggs had approached her execution as a final act of agency, despite concerns over her mental state. During the penalty phase, Riggs told jurors, "I want to die. I want to be with my babies. I want you to give me the death penalty." This behavior was uncommon. Most inmates sentenced to die would cry or beg or even be emotionless when sentenced to die, but it seemed like Riggs, unlike most inmates, wanted to die and was relieved that she got the death sentence. For many activists, that story was a tragic mix of mental illness, domestic crisis, and maternal desperation, not malice. They argued that a mother with extreme depression, sexual trauma in childhood, and a deteriorating support network deserved a different path than execution. They also stated that before the events that led to her children's deaths, Christina Marie Riggs had already attempted to take her own life. According to court records and psychiatric evaluations, her first known suicide attempt occurred in the mid-1990s, following the breakdown of her marriage and the increasing weight of her depression. At the time, she was working full-time as a nurse and raising 2 young children alone. She had been dealing with the emotional aftermath of childhood sexual abuse, the trauma of a miscarriage on her wedding night, and what she later described as years of unrelenting psychological pain. The attempt did not result in hospitalization, but it marked a turning point in her mental health. Despite ongoing symptoms of major depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress, Riggs never received long-term psychiatric care. Those around her largely overlooked this early suicide attempt, and it became a chilling foreshadowing of what would come just a few years later. At exactly 9 p.m. CDT on the 2nd of May 2000, The execution process for Christina Marie Riggs entered its final phase. At this point, the reality of what was coming had started to dwell on her. But even in the face of death, she remained calm as she was led to the room where she would meet her end. Arkansas law strictly specifies who may witness an execution. At this moment, only a handful of people were authorized to remain in or adjacent to the execution room. The execution chamber is a compact, stark room located within the Cummins unit. According to eyewitness reporting, the layout follows a precise and controlled design that consists of the viewing area, witnesses, typically a handful of media representatives, officials, and others, who enter through a separate door marked EC. They sit in rows of simple chairs, facing large rectangular windows that look into the chamber. The partition and curtains is the next section. A black curtain hangs behind the viewing windows. This curtain remains closed during setup like IV placement and is only opened when the execution begins, separating the witnesses from the inmate until the final moment. The final segment is the execution. Inside the chamber is a lone gurney, positioned close enough to the window to be visible once the curtain opens. The room is illuminated by overhead fluorescent lights, which emit a yellowish glow. The inmate is secured face up with straps and head supports to prevent movement. The team administering the lethal injection stands out of view behind the curtain, placing IV lines often in the arms or wrists. Witnesses report a faint reflection in the window of their faces as they peer through the glass, giving the sense of looking through a mirror into the room. When the curtain parts, the stark contrast between the dim observation area and the harsh chamber lights becomes immediately obvious. During her last moments, Christina Marie Riggs was described to be calm, pale, and dressed in a white prison jumpsuit, which fits the description of someone who has accepted death and has made peace with it. Her attorney, John Wesley Hall, Jr., had confirmed her mental competence and ensured her legal rights were honored. The warden of Cummins Unit, the highest-ranking official present, is responsible for the overall administration of the procedure. The assistant warden supported and confirmed protocols. The execution team, typically 5 to 7 correctional staff, trained according to state protocol, were on standby. The medical personnel team consisted a licensed physician, nurse, or a phlebotomist tasked with administering the IV line. A state-appointed spiritual advisor was also allowed to be present if requested. In this case, no clergy presence was recorded, as she made no request. In addition, several media representatives were present. The AP photographers, wire services, and journalists were positioned outside the chamber, observing protocol. Family members and the general public were not permitted on site. Christina's mother, Carol Thomas, did not attend the actual execution. Arkansas law required her to choose between visiting her in the hours before the procedure or being present for the death. According to multiple sources, she chose neither. The correction officer entered the chamber and read aloud the official death warrant, which was printed. Christina acknowledged with a brief nod before she was strapped to the gurney, wrists strapped at her sides. Flannel blankets were arranged around her neck and torso, and a headrest was placed behind her head. Although no record specified this, it is the standard protocol for execution in the state of Arkansas. Warden and 2 medical personnel witnessed as trained staff located a vein. About an 18-minute delay occurred while the staff tried to find a suitable vein for the needle that would dispense the lethal mixture. Initially, attempts in the arms failed, prompting the team to use veins in her wrists. The final line confirmation was made by the physician and the warden together. At some minutes after 9, the officer asked if she had any last words. Christina took a slow, deep breath and nodded, and she recited her final statement. In a steady and calm voice, she said, "There is no way. No words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies, Riggs said moments before the lethal injection began. No way I can make up for or take away the pain I have caused everyone who knew and loved them. I hope someday maybe everyone can forgive me. I know God has, and I believe He saved me 2.5 years ago, bringing me closer to give me the chance to repent and accept Him as my Savior. I've done that. Now I can be with my babies as I always intended. The first substance, a large dose of sodium thiopental to induce unconsciousness, was released via IV. 1 minute after the substances began flowing into her body, Riggs murmured, "I love you, my babies." Some minutes later, the second and third substances, pancuronium bromide, which is a paralytic, and potassium chloride that stops the heart, were administered consecutively. Medical personnel checked her vital signs. Riggs's breathing stopped, her pupils dilated, and her pulse slowed. A few minutes after the final substance, the medical staff announced that her brain had ceased functioning. Christina Marie Riggs was dead. The warden confirmed the time of death at 9:28 p.m. CDT. The room went silent, the curtain was drawn, and the staff exited quietly. That was it, the execution of Christina Marie Riggs. The execution chamber was then prepared for standard cleaning and documentation. Within minutes, the Arkansas Department of Corrections released the public pronouncement, naming the time of death and reaffirming no last-minute petitions or stays had been granted. After the announcement of her death, the Little Rock protesters had disbanded hours earlier after a vigil. Media outlets had filed updates noting execution time and her last words, while reminding readers that this was a voluntary, mentally health-affected execution. Legal groups like the ACLU reaffirmed their stance, citing her trauma, suicidality, and mental health, but accepted the court's ruling. Arkansas did not change its death penalty laws or lethal injection protocols as a direct result of Christina Marie Riggs's case. In the years that followed, the state continued using the same 3-substance protocols, a combination of sodium thiopental or midazolam, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride, without public revisions tied to her execution. However, broader legal and logistical challenges would later reshape how Arkansas handled capital punishment. In March 2025, Arkansas joined a small group of states adopting a new execution method in response to continued substance shortages. Lawmakers passed a bill approving nitrogen gas hypoxia as an alternative method, and Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed it into law on March 18, 2025. This made Arkansas one of the first states in the country to officially permit the use of nitrogen as a legal means of execution. As she left the world at just 28 years old, Christina Marie Riggs's last words were an expression of love, sorrow, and a plea for forgiveness. While she was undeniably responsible for the deaths of her children, many saw her as more than just a criminal. To some, she was also a victim of childhood sexual abuse, mental illness, and years of emotional isolation. To others, she was a cold-blooded murderer who killed her children. Her case remains one of the most emotionally complex in Arkansas history. Some argued that what she truly needed was long-term psychiatric care. Others believed that justice required the sentence she received. But what cannot be debated is that Christina Marie Riggs asked to die. She rejected appeals, refused clemency, and on May 2, 2000, she received exactly what she had asked for. After her execution, Christina Marie Riggs's body was released to her family. She was returned to her home state of Oklahoma, where she was laid to rest in Vernon Cemetery in the small town of Coweta, located in Wagoner County. Her grave is marked with her full name and the dates of her birth and death. There were no public memorials or any major gatherings. There she rests in silence, remembered by some with grief, by others with judgment, and by many with questions that may never be fully answered. Do you believe justice was served with the death sentence, or what Christina Marie Riggs needed was psychiatric care? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.